In my whole career, I've never seen anything like this.
The room had heard royal praise before, but nothing like this. Duchess Sophie did not offer a polite compliment, nor did she hide behind careful palace language. She looked toward Catherine and delivered a sentence powerful enough to change the emotional temperature of the crown itself. Catherine is the woman this crown was always meant for. Within seconds, admiration became something far more dangerous because everyone understood exactly what Sophie appeared to be saying. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Catherine did not smile. She froze, because Sophie's words sounded larger than admiration for years of public duty. William noticed it instantly. Charles remained still, while Camilla's expression tightened across the silence. The crown, in this dramatized account, meant more than the monarch alone. It represented the institution, its duties, and the public expectations carried by the royal family. That was why one sentence could suddenly feel like a judgment on much more than Catherine herself. Sophie understood that weight better than most. The Duchess had spent years close to the working structure of royal life, where language around succession, service, and senior women was normally chosen with extreme care. Succession simply meant the established order determining who inherits the throne. She knew praise could easily sound like positioning when spoken in front of Charles, William, Catherine, and Camilla, yet she had still chosen those exact words. William watched Sophie rather than his wife. The prince then looked toward Charles, searching his father's reaction before anyone spoke. The king offered nothing at first. Camilla remained silent too, but the queen could hear the comparison buried inside the sentence, whether Sophie intended one or not. Catherine finally lowered her gaze, clearly aware that responding too warmly might deepen the meaning people were already attaching to the remark. Sophie refused to rescue the room from its discomfort. When the silence stretched, she calmly added that she meant every word. The Duchess did not laugh it away. She did not call it affection or exaggeration. Her refusal to soften the statement transformed an emotional compliment into something that felt deliberate. Charles finally moved. The king slowly set down the glass in his hand and asked Sophie whether she understood what that sounds like. She met his gaze without retreating and answered with the same quiet certainty that had unsettled everyone moments earlier. William heard the answer, but something else disturbed him more. Sophie looked prepared. The prince began to suspect she had entered that gathering already knowing exactly what she intended to say. And when William started asking why she had chosen that particular moment, the uncomfortable answer led straight toward the relationships hidden behind the public smiles. Behind Sophie's extraordinary sentence stood 4 people carrying very different versions of the monarchy in their hearts. Catherine had spent years learning how to survive its scrutiny. William had spent his entire life preparing to inherit it. Charles was trying to protect the reign he already possessed. And Camilla knew better than almost anyone how quickly public affection could become royal power. Suddenly, one sentence had forced all 4 realities into the same room. Catherine understood the weight of what Sophie had said, because her place inside the royal family had never been built through dramatic gestures. The princess had spent years proving herself through discipline, family responsibility, and the expectation that one day she would stand beside William when he became king. A senior working royal, in simple terms, was a family member who regularly carried out official duties on behalf of the monarch. Sophie had become one of the most trusted figures in that group, and her closeness to Catherine gave her words unusual force. Sophie found Catherine later that evening, and immediately understood why she looked unsettled. The Duchess listened as Catherine quietly asked why she had chosen such powerful language. Sophie took her hand and told her she was tired of watching her underestimate what she had already become to the family. The trusted confidant said she had watched Catherine absorb pressure, protect William, support Charles, and still place duty before recognition. Catherine felt the emotion behind the answer, but unease remained. The princess told Sophie that words like those could create divisions even when spoken with love. She feared praise could quickly become comparison, especially when Camilla was already standing beside Charles as queen. Catherine's first instinct was not to defend herself. It was to protect the family from another internal fracture. William then learned something that made the remark harder to dismiss as spontaneous. Sophie had recently held a separate private conversation with Charles about the future workload of the monarchy and Catherine's growing responsibilities. The prince realized she had already been thinking about who would carry the institution forward long before that evening. Camilla reached the same conclusion from another direction. The queen worried that Sophie's declaration could easily be framed as a comparison between two royal women, with Catherine becoming the symbol of what came next, while she represented the present reign. That possibility made the sentence politically delicate and personally painful. Sophie finally told Catherine the truth. Her statement had not begun that night at all. It had been building since one specific royal occasion months earlier. That earlier moment had changed Sophie's understanding of Catherine completely, and once its details emerged, her shocking declaration suddenly looked less spontaneous than inevitable. Months before Sophie made the statement that stunned the family, there had been another gathering quieter, less dramatic, and almost forgotten by everyone except her. No microphones captured it, no announcement followed. Yet Sophie later regarded that afternoon as the moment something changed permanently. Catherine had been placed under unexpected pressure, Charles was visibly exhausted, and a difficult decision had to be made quickly. What Catherine did next convinced Sophie that the future of the crown already had its emotional center. Charles had been carrying an increasingly heavy royal workload, while the family debated how quickly younger members should assume greater responsibility. The king understood that ceremonial obligations, formal public duties, performed on behalf of the monarchy, could not simply disappear when pressure increased. Sophie had watched Catherine navigate that tension for months. The trusted confidant noticed that she repeatedly accepted difficult work without demanding greater attention, and that restraint had quietly deepened the bond between the two women. The turning point came during the fictional Windsor Commonwealth reception. Charles was due to receive a group of young charity representatives, but shortly before the meeting, exhaustion caught up with him. The king considered shortening the reception, knowing that canceling entirely could disappoint people who had traveled specifically to meet him. Catherine immediately volunteered to take over, but she made one condition clear. The event should still be presented as Charles's initiative, not as an opportunity for her to step into his place. Sophie watched Catherine make that choice, and understood exactly what it cost. The princess could easily have allowed the moment to become proof of her growing importance. Instead, she protected Charles's dignity and kept the focus on his commitment to the guests. The trusted confidant saw loyalty without performance, and that distinction stayed with her long after the reception ended. Catherine looked far less certain once the guests had gone. Sophie found her alone gathering handwritten place cards from the table, and the princess admitted she was worried she had overstepped. She had acted quickly because Charles needed help, but now feared others might interpret the decision as ambition. Sophie reassured her, yet the confession revealed something deeper. Catherine's confidence in public often hid a private fear of appearing to want too much. Sophie later described the moment to Edward in a private conversation. She told him Catherine had shown something no constitutional rule could manufacture: loyalty to the crown, without needing the crown to revolve around her. Edward understood why the observation mattered, and he also understood why Sophie kept it private. Camilla had witnessed the same afternoon. The Queen thanked Catherine politely, but Sophie noticed her becoming unusually withdrawn afterward. Charles later expressed his gratitude in private, yet the emotional contrast remained impossible to ignore. Sophie kept her admiration contained for months, until another disagreement forced loyalty, insecurity, and succession into the same room, and this time she refused to stay silent. The tension finally broke when Camilla asked the question everyone else had carefully avoided. If Sophie believed Catherine was the woman this crown was always meant for, what exactly did that make everyone who had carried the institution before her? The challenge landed hard. Catherine immediately tried to intervene. William remained silent. Charles watched both women, But Sophie did not retreat. Instead, she answered with a distinction so sharp that the confrontation became impossible to contain. Charles had called the smaller family conversation because the original remark was no longer being heard as simple praise. The king knew resentment could spread quickly between royal households if the wording remained unresolved. A royal household, in plain language, meant the staff and working structure surrounding a senior member of the family. He wanted clarity before private discomfort turned into something much harder to repair. Camilla turned directly toward Sophie and finally said what the room had been avoiding. "Then say what you really mean." The queen's voice carried more hurt than anger. Sophie held her ground. The Duchess answered that Catherine represented what the crown needs next, not an attempt to erase or belittle what had come before. The trusted confidant insisted she was speaking about the future, not delivering a verdict on the present. Catherine reacted immediately. The princess asked them both not to make her the dividing line between generations. Her voice tightened as she said she had never asked to be placed above another royal woman, and she did not want admiration for her service turned into a contest with Camilla. William watched his wife struggle to calm a dispute she had never invited, and his silence became increasingly difficult to read. Sophie looked toward Charles and pointed to Catherine's reaction itself. The Duchess said this was exactly why she admired her. Even while being praised, Catherine was trying to protect everyone else in the room. The king heard the logic, but Camilla heard something more painful. Another comparison, even if Sophie insisted comparison was not her purpose. Camilla pushed her chair back and briefly left the room. The sudden movement shattered what little calm remained. Charles stayed seated, visibly caught between sympathy and responsibility, while William finally looked directly at Sophie. William then asked the question that changed the argument completely. Did Sophie believe Catherine was already carrying responsibilities the palace had been reluctant to formally acknowledge? The prince was no longer asking about affection. He was asking about authority. Sophie answered with one word: yes. That single answer moved the dispute beyond emotion, because Charles now had to confront a far more consequential issue: whether Catherine's role had quietly outgrown its official boundaries. And once the argument shifted from affection to authority, the question was no longer what Sophie believed it was, what the king was prepared to do about it. Ultimately, Sophie could praise Catherine, William could defend her, and the public could adore her, but only Charles could decide how rapidly the future monarchy moved toward the present. That reality placed the king in an impossible emotional position. He was not choosing a successor. The succession itself was already clear. He was deciding how much space to give the next generation while protecting the dignity of those serving beside him now. And suddenly, every choice carried a personal cost. Charles sat alone after the confrontation, with notes from the family meeting in front of him. The king read Sophie's exact wording again, then closed the folder without making a decision. Succession, in simple terms, meant the established order deciding who would inherit the throne, and William's position within that order was already fixed. What Charles controlled was everything around it: ceremonial duties, public representation, and how visibly the next generation was allowed to carry the monarchy during his reign. Camilla weighed heavily on his mind. The Queen had experienced Sophie's words as an implicit comparison, and Charles understood why. He felt protective of her dignity, especially after years in which public judgment had shaped almost every part of her royal life. Yet the monarch also knew Catherine had become one of the institution's strongest stabilizing figures. Ignoring that reality simply to avoid uncomfortable symbolism could create a different kind of weakness. William confronted his father privately before the issue could drift into silence. The prince told Charles that Catherine could not become collateral damage in a struggle over generations. She had accepted responsibilities because the family needed her, not because she was trying to replace anyone. The king replied that his son was asking him to do two things at once: protect a family full of emotion, and lead an institution that could not stop evolving. Charles then revealed something William had not expected. Before Sophie ever made her declaration, the king had already been considering increasing Catherine's ceremonial responsibilities. Ceremonial responsibilities meant formal public duties, carried out on behalf of the crown, often designed to represent continuity, service, and national tradition. The discussion was real. Sophie's statement had simply crashed into it at the most sensitive possible moment. The king refused to abandon those plans merely because the family had become uncomfortable. Doing so, he believed, would punish Catherine for a controversy she had not created. But Charles imposed one condition of his own. The pace could not be decided around her. Catherine had to agree personally to every major increase in responsibility. Sophie welcomed that principle when she heard it. William expected his wife to accept. Charles assumed she would understand the opportunity. Catherine surprised all three. Instead of embracing the greater prominence everyone believed she deserved, she responded with a condition of her own, and that single condition immediately changed the balance of the dispute. Catherine had every reason to accept. The king was prepared to trust her with more. Sophie had publicly within the family defended her. William believed she had earned it. Yet when the opportunity finally reached her, Catherine did not respond with triumph. She responded with caution. Her answer reminded everyone why Sophie had made that extraordinary statement in the first place, and at the same time exposed just how deeply the controversy had wounded the family around her. Charles made his intention clear through a private briefing. The king wanted Catherine to take on expanded ceremonial responsibilities, but he did not want the change presented as punishment or displacement for anyone else. Ceremonial responsibilities, in simple terms, meant formal public duties carried out on behalf of the monarch. William expected the decision to bring relief after days of tension. Instead, Catherine immediately saw the danger hidden inside it. Catherine told William in private that she would accept only if the change was framed as service to Charles, not as proof that she had somehow defeated Camilla in a silent competition. The princess understood how quickly symbolism could become accusation. She had no intention of allowing Sophie's praise to become a weapon against another royal woman. William looked stunned for a moment, then quietly told her he understood exactly why she was drawing that line. Sophie heard about the condition through a private conversation with William and became emotional. The Duchess had defended Catherine because she believed the future monarchy needed her strength, yet once again, the princess was using that strength to protect everyone around her. The trusted confidant realized that Catherine was refusing the very kind of victory others might have expected her to enjoy. Camilla received an even more surprising detail. Catherine had specifically asked that no duties be taken directly from the Queen simply to increase her own visibility. That request weakened some of the defensiveness Camilla had carried since Sophie's original statement. She began to understand that Catherine was not trying to move ahead by pushing anyone else aside. Camilla sat with Charles afterward, removed her reading glasses, placed them beside the briefing, and admitted something difficult. The Queen said perhaps she had reacted less to Sophie's actual words than to the fear hidden behind them, the fear of becoming a symbol of what the monarchy was leaving behind. The king listened without interrupting, because her honesty exposed the real wound beneath the argument. Charles then decided schedules could not solve what emotion had created. The king arranged a private meeting between Catherine and Sophie, with no aides, spouses, or palace staff present. And when the two women finally sat alone, stripped of titles, protocol, and everyone else's interpretation, the entire meaning of the controversy began to shift. For days, everyone else had interpreted Sophie's words. Charles heard a challenge to balance. Camilla heard comparison. William heard recognition. The palace heard risk. But Catherine had still not heard the one explanation that mattered most. The explanation Sophie had never been able to give without someone else in the room. Now the two women sat across from each other alone, and Sophie finally revealed that her declaration had never truly been about crowns, hierarchy, or replacing anyone. Catherine spoke first, because she needed honesty more than reassurance. The princess admitted that Sophie's statement had frightened her, not because she rejected the affection behind it, but because praise inside royal life could quickly become expectation. A private secretary, in simple terms, was a senior aide who helped manage a royal's official work, And none were present now. No husbands, no briefing notes, no official record. Catherine told Sophie that expectation could become so heavy that eventually the person disappeared beneath the role. Sophie listened without interrupting, then reached across the table. The Duchess told Catherine she had never meant that the crown somehow belonged to her. She meant that Catherine had spent years behaving as though she belonged to its responsibility. The trusted confidant said she had watched her absorb pressure, defend others, and step forward without demanding recognition. To Sophie, that was the difference between wanting status and understanding service. Catherine's composure finally weakened. The princess admitted she still feared failing William, her children, and the institution all at once when the future eventually arrived. She could carry duty in public, but privately she worried that no amount of preparation could guarantee she would be enough when the burden became permanent. Sophie answered that fear did not make her weaker. It was part of what kept her careful. Sophie then revealed something she had never shared outside a private conversation with herself. After the fictional Windsor Commonwealth reception, the Duchess had written a personal note describing Catherine as someone who makes duty feel human. She had carried that conviction for months, long before the explosive family gathering turned it into 7 unforgettable words. Sophie also accepted her own mistake. The trusted confidant admitted her dramatic wording had unintentionally hurt Camilla and said she would address that directly. Catherine would not carry responsibility for pain caused by words she had never asked Sophie to say. Catherine stopped asking for the sentiment to be softened. Instead, she asked for one promise. Admiration could never be allowed to become rivalry. Sophie agreed immediately. Inside that room, the controversy finally changed shape. The two women understood each other. Outside palace walls, however, millions were about to decide for themselves what Sophie's words meant, and the public reaction would transform a private family statement into the defining royal story of the moment. By the next morning, Sophie's declaration had escaped the private emotional world in which it began. The sentence was everywhere, not because it announced a constitutional change, but because it seemed to capture something many people already felt when they looked at Catherine. Yet the reaction was not universally comfortable. Some saw the future, others saw an unnecessary comparison. And outside Buckingham Palace, one simple handwritten message suddenly gave the entire debate a human face. Catherine felt the pressure almost immediately. The princess saw headlines placing her beside phrases like "new crown" and "future monarchy," and the attention made her deeply uneasy. Constitutional succession, in simple terms, is the legal order that determines who eventually inherits the throne, and nothing Sophie had said altered that structure. Yet public emotion rarely moved with legal precision. Catherine feared the coverage was turning humility into ambition and transforming Sophie's intended praise into a story about replacement. Sophie refused to complain about the scrutiny. The Duchess told Edward in a private conversation that she had chosen words powerful enough to provoke powerful reactions, and she would accept the consequences of that choice. The trusted confidant still believed what she had said about Catherine, but she now understood more clearly how quickly affection could become symbolism once the outside world claimed it. Outside Buckingham Palace, that symbolism suddenly became personal. A small crowd gathered as visitors photographed a handwritten card left near the gates. It carried only 4 simple words: Catherine duty with kindness. The message spread rapidly because it captured the softer meaning behind Sophie's declaration without turning it into a contest. For many, it became the emotional image of the entire day. One major evening broadcast pushed the conversation even further. Rather than frame the story as a rivalry between Catherine and Camilla, the presenter described it as evidence that the monarchy's generational transition was already happening emotionally before it happened constitutionally. That distinction mattered. It suggested the public could begin attaching its hopes to the future without demanding that the present disappear. Charles watched part of the coverage beside Camilla and did not turn it off. The king understood how painful comparisons could become, especially for the Queen, after everything the family had already endured. He told her quietly that Catherine being loved did not require anyone else to be diminished. Camilla listened, and this time she did not argue. The queen understood that public affection was not a finite resource. The noise beyond the palace walls would eventually fade. But inside the family, one final truth remained. Charles, Catherine, Sophie, William, and Camilla now had to decide what those 7 words had truly changed, and what they had not. In the end, no title changed. No crown moved from one head to another. No constitutional line was rewritten. Yet Sophie's words mattered because they forced the royal family to confront something protocol could never settle. What kind of person should carry the monarchy into its next chapter? The answer was not about defeating Camilla, overshadowing Charles, or accelerating William's destiny. It was about Catherine, and the qualities those closest to her believed she had quietly proven over years. Charles finally drew the distinction the family needed. The king decided Sophie's statement would not be treated as an institutional declaration, meaning an official position or decision made on behalf of the monarchy. But he also refused to punish its emotional truth simply because the language had been unusually direct. Catherine's expanded responsibilities would continue as already planned, framed clearly as support for Charles and the wider family rather than any symbolic transfer of power. Sophie then faced Camilla privately and did what the argument had demanded from the beginning. The Duchess apologized for the hurt caused by her wording, but she did not withdraw her admiration for Catherine. She explained that praising what the princess represented for the future was never meant to erase the queen's place in the present. Camilla listened, then accepted the distinction. The queen understood that an apology for pain did not require Sophie to deny what she genuinely believed. William found his own meaning in everything that had happened. The prince told Catherine that Sophie's praise was not what moved him most. What stayed with him was his wife's repeated refusal to benefit from anyone else's humiliation. Catherine answered quietly that there would be nothing worth inheriting if the family destroyed itself before their generation arrived. The future king understood that her instinct was still the same: protect the institution by protecting the people inside it. Charles recognized the same truth. The monarch finally understood why Sophie's words had landed with such force. Catherine did not appear hungry for the crown, yet she repeatedly behaved with an awareness of what protecting it demanded. That was the quality the trusted confidant had been trying to name all along. Sophie's declaration therefore became something far more meaningful than a prediction about titles. It became a judgment of character, steadiness, restraint, compassion, and the ability to make royal duty feel human. Camilla's place remained secure. Charles's authority remained intact. William's future remained unchanged. Sophie stood by the heart of her words. And Catherine finally accepted that the future others saw in her was no longer something she could completely refuse to see in herself. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.